the story on Saudi Arabia sending their terrorist killers, their takfiris, from Syria to Ukraine is on FARS news agency. And if you want the link, go to my Twitter feed, Webster G. Tarpley, and you will find a link from a couple of days ago on, I say basically, Prince Bandar is doing this. It's a large number of terrorist Takfiri fighters in Syria, Saudi and Chechen nationals, back up from Saudi intelligence, meaning Bandar, have been sent to Kiev, and they are being used to help the Ukrainian army fight against the pro-Russian population, said an Arab security official to FARS news agency this past Sunday. Just a couple of notes on U.S. domestic before we get back to Ukraine. The death penalty in Oklahoma. Well, the death penalty has to end. The evolving standard of civilization is that the death penalty is cruel and unusual. Notice, cruel and unusual are to a certain extent a matter of judgment. You might say a matter of opinion, a matter of, what would they say today, evolving community standards, I suppose. Unusual it is for sure, because when you look at the developed areas of the world, in particular Western Europe, the death penalty is virtually extinct. And among the American states, it's becoming fewer and fewer states that still impose this barbarism, a relic of barbarism. So the death penalty must be ended. And one reason is that it's racist. Look at the number of black people and so forth, and don't be fooled by this fast-talking huckster from the, the Heritage Foundation, paid for by what? By the Koches, by the Coors, Fortune, whatever it is. These reactionaries can pay to set up quackademics in Washington, and then they become part of the national debate. We don't need them. The death penalty is barbaric, and it must be ended. No more death penalty. It's unusual, and it's cruel. And that, of course, is to a certain degree a subjective judgment that evolves based on the criteria inherent in the current phase of world civilization. So based on all that, it must end. And, well, that's the leading part. Now, we'll get back to the to certain domestic questions. Oh, yeah, here's another one. This global warming report, I am sorry, the Obama administration scraping the bottom of the barrel, demagogically trying to please some Malthusian billionaire, have decided to issue this global warming report. And what I find horrifying is the immediate Pavlovian reaction of so many of these left liberals is to jump from some conclusion about global warming, climate change, greenhouse gases, whatever it is, to cap and trade. Aren't you guys supposed to be anti-Wall Street? Are you going to immediately embrace Wall Street to the extent that you're going to say, let's create a speculative market that will allow Wall Street predators, Wall Street parasites, and Wall Street speculators to profit from the so-called price of carbon? I guarantee you, if I can ever get the Wall Street sales tax implemented, then you will find that any carbon market will immediately be taxed as well. And, of course, just this past week, we've had another milestone in the struggle in Europe to impose some kind of financial transaction tax, which has now gone through another round of implementation. This was, of course, the British, the London world capital of parasitical speculation. They were of course, complaining that they don't want the European Union to impose a financial transaction tax, but it has gone through, and that means France, Germany, Italy, Estonia, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Austria, Belgium, Slovenia, Slovakia are all headed for a financial transaction tax. Why not here? And in Canada, how about Canada? Wouldn't you do well up there? You would. So the financial transaction tax, and the main opposition comes from the parasitical usury capital of the world, the city of London, and of course some of these smaller British satellites in Northern Europe joining in. So cap and trade, in other words, Waxman-Markey. Oh God, Waxman-Markey and cap and trade is no answer to anything. Your answer to a problem is to create another dimension of speculation. There's a monstrosity. Now, if you want to take global warming seriously, sure, fine, we can do it. You can start building fourth-generation, pebble-bed, high-temperature nuclear reactors to replace the current 103 increasingly obsolete reactors in the U.S. Other countries are doing it. Russia is doing it. China is doing it big time, and on, and it could be done here. The other thing, of course, is to put more money into ITER, the World Thermonuclear Fusion Power Project. But there's lots you can do even short of these. You can go with a boxcar or a large-scale program of urban mass transit, electric subways, electric trolleys, cheap, convenient, attractive, comfortable, safe, urban mass transit to take cars off the road. And similar things, right? You can modernize all kinds of infrastructure to reduce the emission of carbon. Sure, that's fine. You can prepare the Port of New York and other ports for a repetition of Superstorm Sandy. You can take that Dutch system of protecting against flood surges and storm surges, and you can implement that in the main ports of the United States. You can do all that. But cap and trade? Wall Street? Speculation? Rip-offs? Not in a million years. Back in a minute. Tarpley on May 9th, 2014. The other thing I wanted to point to concerning global warming, you're going to tell me that that's the main problem of the world? I'm sorry. I tried to find new statistics. I was looking today for post-2008, 2009 statistics on how many people die every day from malnutrition, starvation, and these diseases, diarrhea and so forth, that can be cured for pennies. We can even add not just tuberculosis, but malaria, right? Killing millions every year. The best I could find was that in 2007, 21,000 kids per day died of malnutrition and starvation. That is to say, in the year 2010, this is a little bit more recent, in 2010 it was 7.6 million children under the age of 5, but that, of course, leaves out everybody else. I would have to estimate that the number of deaths is somewhere in the area of 30 to 40,000 per day. These are cadavers, not threats, not hypotheticals, dead bodies every day. And you can't tell me, as long as that goes on, that the fate of the pelicans, the penguins, the polar bears, and the snail darters, and all the rest of this stuff, the spotted owl, that all of that weighs more than 30, 40,000 human beings every day, including 21,000 children as of 2007, and I'm sure it's worse than that now. Now, on the this rents program this week, let me just try to sum this up. I tried to link the monstrosity of the Cloven Bundy phenomenon, right? Actual white supremacist armed checkpoints being tolerated by the federal authorities here in the United States, right? This cannot go on for long. Maybe other militias will come forward to challenge them, because maybe there's some other group that wants to come forward with weaponry, right, to challenge them. But this is exactly what we cannot have. We must have the monopoly of law and force on the part of the federal government. And again, the libertarians, they're going to scream like stuck pigs. That sounds bad, I agree, except when you consider the alternative, because if you don't have the federal government monopoly on law and armed force, then what are you going to have? You're going to have the do-it-yourself white supremacist gangs of Cloven Bundy. You're going to have Ron Kokesh come forward with his libertarians marching through the black neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. with loaded rifles, and on and on. And this is exactly what you cannot have. Now, this neo-feudalism. Surprise, neo-feudalism. Surprise that the Rockefellers, the Koches, and others have decided to fund neo-feudalist ideologies and social formations. And I wanted to point you back to two historical parallels. The Holy Roman Empire, where this was Germany, right, up until about the Napoleonic years, no central authority, no taxation of the nobility, and you had either 300 mini-states, or if you wanted to, you could extend that to 2,000 so-called independent entities if you add in these imperial knights. And they were always yelling about their German liberties and so forth. And the example that I wanted to point to was this infamous cuius regio eius religio, the lord of the state, the duke, the count, the prince, whatever he is. He essentially owns this little principality or dukedom, and he tells everybody what their religion is going to be. And that is Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby says, you work for us, we get to dictate your religion, in the sense that we get to tell you whether or not you're allowed to have birth control or transfusions or organ transplants or vaccinations or life support, whatever it is. Then, and that, of course, doomed the Holy Roman Empire. Then we have Poland, and Poland at this point includes that entire area of Western Ukraine where the fascists are currently the strongest. And this is the example in Europe of a country where the landed aristocracy, the landowners, people like Cloven Bundy, won out completely over everybody else, right? The cities were composed of Germans and Jews, and they had no rights, no vote, even though that's, obviously where the wealth and commerce came from. But the Schlachta, the lower nobility, and the magnates, the higher nobility, they dictated what they want. And in the Diet, it was an elective monarchy, just like the Holy Roman Empire. The king was elected when the old one died, and this made for a very weak form of government. The key phrase with Poland is the liberum veto, that out of an assembly of several hundred oligarchs, landowners, or their representatives, it took just one vote to stop the entire thing. And not just stop it, not just say, I will not tolerate this measure, but to explode the Diet. Everybody goes home, and if you've been there for 2 or 3 months, passing all kinds of measures, all of that is canceled, abrogated, rolled back. No result if at the end of the session, on the very last vote, one crackpot oligarch paid by the French, the Swedes, the Russians, the Prussians, or whoever it was, says no. That's the filibuster. And exploding the Diet. Well, you look at the current Congress. Our current Congress is essentially exploded. It doesn't pass anything. We're getting nowhere. Paralysis, the inability to respond. And the other one in this Polish Republic Commonwealth is the right of confederation. That is, even the liberum veto was not enough. If something was happening still that you really wanted to fight against, you had the right to go out and assemble an armed gang, and private army, if you want, to fight against other private armies or against the central government. So, as we heard, and again, I recommend there are any number of good studies of this. The King of Poland had essentially no courts, no army, no power of taxation, and this doomed the country, so much so that these neighboring countries, Russia, Prussia, would all say, oh, no, we won't allow you to roll back this wonderful libertarian liberum veto. So the monopoly of law and force, characteristic of the modern state, failed to develop in Poland. The King of Poland had practically no army, no law courts, no officials, and no income. The nobility paid no taxes. And this is the German case and the Polish case. The nobility, the landowners, refused to be taxed. And instead, if you threaten to tax them, they assemble private armies. That's Cloven Bundy. That's the negation of civilization. This is absolutely off the charts. And, of course, Poland, the German case is that it's these small states, right, local control. Right? Let's have 300 or even 2,000 countries in the territory of Germany, the crazy quilt and crazy politics. In the case of Poland, it's all theoretically one country, but it's actually controlled by about a dozen magnates, top oligarchs, and so forth. So in Germany, the local lord is going to tell you, hey, guess what, you're a Catholic, or guess what, you're a Calvinist, or you're a Lutheran, and that's what you've got to be. And in Poland, it's this entire monstrosity. I recommend, for a patriotic Polish view, the great historical painter Matejko, Matejko. You can see a sample of his work on Tarpley.net. Go to Tarpley.net, take a look at Matejko. This is a painting from around the time of the American Civil War. The great Jesuit Skarga, whose name is on the front of the library here at Catholic University. Skarga, like Moses, giving an anathema, right, a really vigorous critique, condemnation to this collection of princes, magnates, oligarchs, and so forth, essentially saying they're destroying Poland. And take a look at the other works by Matejko as well. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Our last segment here already on the 9th of May. Now, concerning this question, right, the issue of whether there would be an efficient, centralized government in this country is largely has been determined by the American Civil War. And this past week, we've gone through some very important anniversaries in this. And we're talking, of course, about the battles of the Wilderness, which was this past Monday and Tuesday, and we're now into the anniversary of Spotsylvania Courthouse, a battle that went on from the 8th to the 21st of May. And we're looking then forward to the anniversary of the North Anna battle, Cold Harbor, and then Grant crossing the James River and attacking Petersburg, south of the James. And this is a stirring series of anniversaries. And in particular, I would like to point you to this fateful moment which occurred this past Wednesday. In other words, Wednesday was the 150th anniversary of this critical moment after the Wilderness. 2 days, huge battle of the Wilderness, 18,000 Union casualties, 12,000 Confederate, so a ratio of 3 to 2. But that ratio guarantees the defeat of the Confederacy because they cannot replace their losses because of their weakness, right? So their logistical weakness. So what we have is this moment, and all the commentators agree that this is a key moment, right after the Wilderness, and this is on Wednesday of this past week. The battle is Monday and Tuesday of this past week. This key critical turning point moment, Wednesday, in particular Wednesday evening. And here's what it is. On the morning of May 7th, 1864, 150 years ago Wednesday, Grant ordered the Army of the Potomac to proceed from the Wilderness battlefield around the flank of Lee's Confederate Army to Spotsylvania Courthouse. He wrote the orders at 6:30 a.m. The wagon train started moving at 3 p.m. on the 7th, and the troops began marching at 8:30 in the evening. Sheridan and the cavalry guarded the right flank of the marching army, and he was, shielding this movement. And this is the beginning of the end of the Civil War in the Eastern Theater. And here's one version of it. This is Fletcher Pratt. So at this, the road is now going east, and the question is, they come to a crossroads, and will they go north back to Washington or south? Here's Fletcher Pratt. At Chancellorsville House, there is a three-cornered intersection. The road to the left led back to the Rappahannock, back to the Potomac, out of the grim woods to fortifications, comfort, and safety. And on the right, it was a road that led past the rebel front, deeper than ever into the perilous and uncertain Wilderness, as the defeated troops came slogging down to the turn. Defeated is maybe too much, but certainly bloodied and exhausted, came slogging down to the turn. The dispirited soldiers saw dimly a man in an old blue coat sitting on his horse at the crossroads with a cigar in his mouth. He silently motioned the guides of each regiment down the right-hand road. Grant. They stared for a moment, and then the slanting lines of steel took the road to terror and death, borne up on an uncontrollable wave of cheering. That night, the men were happy. All right, that's Fletcher Pratt. Now, here's another one. Here's Wilkeson, a Union soldier, Reflections of a Private in the Army of the Potomac. Grant's military standing with the enlisted men hung on the direction we turned after the Battle of Wilderness when the troops reached Chancellorsville House. If we went to the left, Grant was going to be put in the same category as Meade and Hooker and Burnside and Pope. Failures, people who would not fight total war. At the Chancellorsville House, we turned to the right. Instantly, all of us heard a cry of relief. Our spirits rose. We marched free. The men began to sing. The enlisted men understood the flanking movement. That night, we were happy. Now, here's a post-war article by General Horace Porter, and this is from the Century magazine, right? These are the ones that found their way into the collection, Battles and Leaders of the Civil War. Here's what Porter says. He's a general with the Army of Grant. The soldiers, weary and sleepy after the long battle on Monday and Tuesday, with stiffened limbs and smarting wounds, sprang to their feet, forgetful of their pains, and rushed forward to the roadside. Wild cheers echoed through the forest, and glad shouts of triumph rent the air. Men swung their hats, tossed up their arms, and pressed forward to within touch of their chief, Grant, clapping their hands and speaking to him with the familiarity of comrades. Pine knots and leaves were set on fire and lighted the scene with their weird flickering glare. The night march had become a triumphal procession for the new commander. The demonstration was emphatic, was the verdict pronounced by the troops in Grant's favor on the first battle in the East. So that's the moment where Grant says, look, I'm not going to be like these other set-piece generals. This is the trip to total war, modern war, right? In the modern war, you don't have a battle and then go home for 2 months. It's continuous. And now Grant imposes that for the first time, right? All during May and within 1 month or 5 weeks of setting out from Washington, he has besieged Petersburg, and Lee knows that it's only a question of time. And I submit to you, the cause of human freedom and human dignity was riding on Grant and the Army of the Potomac, because Lee is essentially a slaveholder of a slaveholders' rebellion, and the Army of Northern Virginia was the main manifestation of slavery in the Western Hemisphere. It was an army that if you were black, if you were captured by the Army of Northern Virginia in the Antietam campaign or the Gettysburg campaign, they would enslave you. They would kidnap you and put you into slavery. And it's when the famous Juneteenth anniversary in Texas, when the news comes to Texas that the Confederates are defeated, they no longer exist, and the Emancipation Proclamation is the law of the land. The thing that convinces the slaves of Texas that slavery is over is that Lee has surrendered and the Army of Northern Virginia has been destroyed. Now, let's just go back to Fletcher Pratt, see how much of this we can get in. What happened to Lee when he saw that Grant did not turn away, but was essentially closing in on him, and these iron claws were holding him, and he couldn't do anything? Lee was a more complicated or less specialized mechanism. He heard the news with incredulity and misgiving. Something incomprehensible had happened. He had fought on ground of his own choosing. His tactical touch had never been more exquisite. Longstreet's assault at the Wilderness had been delivered with indomitable fervor. The Federals were driven back at every point under losses that should have shaken them to the core, but the old sword, the invincible Durandal, had failed to bite. Instead of taking refuge behind the Rappahannock, the obstinate Federals were encircling his flank exactly as though they had won. This shock produced in Lee the first stages of a mental disintegration which it had been hitherto his privilege to inflict on others. For the first time in his life, he failed to write his wife for a week, and never again did he undertake a general assault on Grant's army. So there it is, the decisive moment, or one of the several of the Civil War, took place this past Wednesday, and that is the key to the modern world, the world of the modern nation state. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.